All of a sudden, I found myself in the midst of grade sixes. So we had about 10 minutes, and so I thought, well, what to talk about with these kids? And so I thought, we'll talk about relationships and conflict resolution without naming it explicitly as such. So I gave them a hypothetical. So I said, okay, imagine boys and girls, you are married, and you're the husband in this relationship. And for whatever reason, you've forgotten about your wedding anniversary. So now you're writing a letter of apology to your wife, and the letter goes something like this. Dear Jenny, I'm sorry, signed, your husband. So what's missing? And obviously they all got it. Well, what are you sorry for? Right. But then here's the interesting thing. What else could you say? What else could you add to the letter? Now at this point, the room became divided between boys and girls. And so the boys said something like, well, look, you could say, look, I'll buy you a steak dinner. Typical guys, always trying to fix stuff. The girls had to help out. Girls, what are they missing? And the girls are like, well, feelings, right? Talk about her feelings. Right. So what is she feeling and why? And so initially they said, well, you're angry because he missed your wedding anniversary. To which I said, try again. So they thought about it. It took a while, but they said, okay, well, I guess you're angry and you're upset and you're sad because when he did this thing, it would seem to suggest that he doesn't care. He doesn't care about the marriage, doesn't care about us, doesn't care about me. And on top of that, I guess you feel kind of scared. So if he misses the wedding anniversary, if he doesn't care about us, he doesn't care about the marriage, what does it mean for us and me going forward in our lives, right? So they got it on grade 6. I love that example. It helps to kind of frame this wider discussion as to what it means to be sorry. Not to simply say that you're sorry, but what it means to actually be sorry. So shades of today's second reading, right? 1 John chapter 3, we're called to love not simply in word or in speech, but in truth and in action. So in that note, I want to give you some practical advice in terms of how to be sorry, right? So the first thing that comes to mind is to be very specific. To be very specific as to why you're actually sorry. No small thing. Now, obviously, you have to be practical, right? So if you're going down the street and you accidentally bump into someone, just say you're sorry and move on. You know, you got your life to live, right? So there's that. But if we're talking about a situation where, in contrast, there's a prior relationship and there's hurt feelings, there's a breach of trust, a sense of betrayal, all the more reason to be very, very specific as to why you're actually expressing sorrow. To use an analogy, I took this course a long time ago called Good Leaders, Good Shepherds, teaching priests about organizational behavior principles, and they talked about good feedback versus lousy feedback. And the point that was being made was that good feedback is not simply positive feedback. You can have positive feedback which is still lousy because good feedback is specific feedback, as opposed to lousy feedback which is non-specific feedback. If you say to someone, good job, it's positive feedback, but because it's non-specific, it's still kind of lousy. It's one thing to say to someone, look, good job. It's another thing to say to someone, look, good job because you did this thing in this particular way. So it's specific and therefore good. So the same principle applies when you're apologizing. All the more so, right? Just think it through, right? If I'm not specific in terms of why I'm apologizing, my apology can come across as being flat and can even be kind of hurtful. Because implicitly what you're inviting the other person to do is let me off the hook. Let me off the hook so I don't have to take responsibility with regards to this thing that I did to hurt you. And so as a result, the apology becomes more about me and me feeling better as opposed to you and restoring the relationship. So very, very important. Be very specific as to what you're apologizing for. Second thing kind of goes to the crux of what it means to be contrite. You have to have what's called a firm purpose of amendment. A firm purpose of amendment, right? And what this means is that being sorry, being contrite is not about feeling a certain way. It's not about feeling sad. It's not about feeling upset. It's not about feeling guilty or a sense of shame. It has nothing to do with feeling anything, right? Being sorry means I have a firm purpose of amendment. I have some idea as to what I might do going forward to possibly bring about a different outcome. Now, to take it one step further, right? You don't want to simply avoid the wrongdoing in the future. You want to strive to cultivate the opposite virtue. So let's say, for example, you miss your wedding anniversary, and you conclude, perhaps rightly, that's symptomatic of a certain neglect in your relationship. Rather than simply circle that date in the calendar multiple times, to strive towards building into your life certain habits and structures and routines where I can show my spouse that I care, that I'm attentive, that I love him or her. Mindful of the fact there's a huge difference between simply trying to avoid being a neglectful spouse and actively trying to be an attentive spouse. Final point, you want to make sure that you do something to make up for the wrong which has been done. You want to make sure that you're really attentive to doing something to make up for the wrong which has been done. This is often overlooked, right? So to use an analogy, let's say you have a baseball and you throw it through a window and the window's broken. I'm sorry, will you accept my apology? Fine, so you're forgiven. But there's still the issue of the broken window. So you need to do something to help repair the window. So we call that reparation, right? And the thing I want to suggest to you is that don't skip immediately to buying people steak dinners. You want to focus first on hurt feelings and emotional pain. Don't skip steps. I'll give you an analogy. So recently I saw this movie called The Accountant, starring Ben Affleck. It came out in 2016. It's about this guy who's highly proficient, so he's good at math, hence The Accountant. He's also an assassin, don't worry about that. But also he's a high-functioning autistic, which means social cues don't come naturally to him, right? So there's a scene early on in the film where he's in prison with another fellow inmate, and he's the younger inmate, the other guy's older. And the older inmate is trying to teach him about social cues, right? So the older inmate says to Ben Affleck's character, look, let me give you a hypothetical. Imagine it's me, and I say to you, look, I'm a year older, I'm never gonna get out of this place. I'm gonna die in prison. What do you say? Well, you're probably right. You are older, and it's unlikely you'll ever leave this place. And the other guy says, no. What am I feeling? Right, you're frustrated. That's right, I'm frustrated. Now, you might hear that, and if you see yourself as being practical, you might think, well, what's the point of that? Why not skip to some variation of, look, I'll buy you a steak dinner? You gotta realize you're dealing with relationships. The primary currency when it comes to relationships is trust. The primary currency when it comes to relationships is trust. If I don't trust you, the relationship can only go so far. If I don't trust you, we can't be friends. And if I don't trust you, what, you're gonna buy me a steak dinner? You gotta do better than that. There's different things you can do to rehabilitate the sense of lost trust, but one thing which can be really helpful is to acknowledge and reflect back to the other person what they feel. You feel this for this reason, especially when it comes to hurt feelings and emotional pain, especially if you're the cause of those hurt feelings and emotional pain. You can't just do it once and then constantly an apology. This has to be a way of being. I habitually do things such that constantly you feel seen and known and loved. That's how you slowly build up the reservoir of trust, which has perhaps been lost over a long period of neglect. Okay, one final example on with this. And so, Dr. Bob Schutz, as you know, he's the co-host of the Restore the Glory podcast. He was talking once about couples retreats, and he mentioned that at the end of some of these retreats, the husband and wife, both of them, will write these apology letters to each other. And basically what he said was that the key to writing an effective apology letter is to respect the process. There's always this temptation to skip to the end. I'm sorry, will you forgive me? Because you want to feel better. You want the sense of catharsis. Certainly that's a good and holy desire, but if you want to have the letter be effective, if you want the apology to be effective, you can't skip steps. You have to hit all the notes. So something like this. I acknowledge this thing that I did. This is the thing that I did, and it hurt you in this particular way. It had this effect in your life. It made you feel this particular way. Hurt feelings and emotional pain. Here's what I'm prepared to do to avoid that thing in the future. A firm purpose of amendments. Here's what I'm willing to do to make up for the harm which has been done. Reparation, repairing the broken window. And on top of that, to ask the question, what am I missing? So here's this thing I've written down. Here's this thing perhaps I'm saying to you. What am I missing? When you hear what I'm thinking, when you hear the structure of this apology, does this reflect your experience as to what actually happened? And does this touch upon what you actually need to move forward in a relationship? If I'm missing something, tell me, and I'll write the letter again. Now, you might have to write the letter multiple times, but sure, by all means do so, because the letter is not for you, the letter is for the other person, the letter is for a relationship. It might take time to kind of go through this process, but at the end, the other person will feel better, but also you'll feel a lot better too. Because you'll realize that this is something meaningful. We're actually communicating about something in the aftermath of perhaps grievous harm. And then at the very end, what you say is, Will you forgive me? And if yes, I want to go for a steak dinner. In the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit.